Hi, I'm Natasha Sinyanovich, a public radio journalist, and this is Women Like Sex, a myth-busting podcast that examines the many, many medical, scientific, and social facts about female sexuality that were never, in fact, facts. Especially the very modern-day belief that women don't like sex as much as men do. I'll be speaking with experts, educators, friends, comedians, and listeners of all ages, backgrounds, and parts of the globe to flip the scripts on myths and misconceptions that have long been dictated by not women. Together, we'll replace so much inaccurate messaging with healthier, smarter, factual facts, and get the sex ed we wished we'd gotten. If you don't know who the boy in the boat is, or what sneezing in the cabbage means, you soon will. And if you still believe that Victorian-era doctors masturbated women to cure the patriarchal illness of hysteria, you soon won't, thanks to this week's guest. Dr. Kate Lister specializes in the history of sexuality and gender studies, and in making people laugh while upending what they think they know about sex throughout the ages. Along with peer-reviewed academic work, she's authored the best-selling books A Curious History of Sex and Harlots, Whores, and Hackabouts, A History of Sex Work. She's also a columnist, television presenter, and host of one of my favorite podcasts, Betwixt the Sheets, A History of Sex, Scandal, and Society, which recently won the Listener's Choice Award at this year's British Podcast Awards. So congratulations to that. Kate joined me to talk about a variety of topics, including the earliest known writings about sex from Mesopotamia, what we've inherited from the uber-repressive Victorians, and some of her favorite historical slang for sex and genitalia. We ran out of time to discuss what is actually not the world's oldest profession, but I will invite her back to teach us about the history of sex work and more in the future. Let's begin. I wish I could do your great northern accent and just say, it's only Kate Lister.
in a Yorkshire brogue.
I'm not even going to attempt it, in as much as I love Northern British.
You don't have to do Northern British. You've got the American twang. That's terribly exotic to us still.
I have just a generic one. No one could ever tell you where I'm from.
It's still quite exciting to us Brits, though. Like, from ever since the Second World War, when you came over with chocolate rations and stockings, we've been mildly excited by an American accent. It is waning slightly, in current events, but still, it's there.
As it should be waning. I am addicted to British TV, so that's basically all I watch, and mostly British noir, or then the panel shows like 8 out of 10 Cats does Countdown and QI.
Love those. Yeah.
Anything that Sandy Toksvig is on.
Yeah, we do love Sandy Toksvig. National treasure. Icon.
I want to hit upon everything a little bit. Your books and your podcast, Betwixt the Sheets, which is one of the few podcasts that I listen to religiously.
Wow, okay. Okay, that's you and my mum then.
I absolutely love it. Let's just kind of start chronologically in the sense of, do you remember at what age, or do you remember early in childhood when you began to realize that most of what you'd been taught, most of what you learned or just absorbed about female sexuality in general, but especially about female sexuality, was basically bullshit? It had nothing to do with reality.
That didn't happen in childhood. That was in my 30s. Maybe in my 40s when that penny started to drop. I think that for a lot of people, they're still unpicking that one. I became aware of sex before I even knew what sex was, I think. I was aware as a child that grown-ups were shielding me from something, and I desperately wanted to know what it was. Like, why did you have to turn the TV channel over? Like, what's the joke that I'm not allowed to hear? Why is everyone being hushed up? What's the thing that I'm not allowed to see? I had no idea what it was. And then, like everyone else, is you have your sexual debut, and then you are part of the world around you receiving messages. And it was into my 30s, I think, before I realized this is bollocks. I mean, I was aware that like most of what we think about sex anyway is kind of nonsense. My research showed me that we are subject to cultural myths and conditioning like everyone else before us was. I mean, you can't not reach that conclusion if you study any period in history and realize how different their understanding is from ours, or how similar, and then you realize that actually we are in our own little weird angsty hang up. But specifically women's sex, Obviously throughout history I've been aware that women have been lied to horrendously, but as a person walking around today, do I think that women's sexuality is still massively misunderstood? Yeah, that was into my 30s where I suddenly started asking myself, why am I faking orgasms? Why am I doing that? Like while I'm having sex,
Right.
not like while I'm in the supermarket or anything. Like just to
Right.
clarify that one. But if I'm not going to orgasm, why aren't I just saying it's not going to happen this time? Thank you for putting in the effort. Sterling performance, young man, but it's just not going to happen. Or like why? And it's because I want him to feel good about the sex. I want him to feel like he's accomplished something, which is effectively relegating your pleasure second. It makes your pleasure a performance, an understudy to somebody else's. So that was quite a moment, and I've sort of been on a bit of a journey with that one ever since. But if you study the history of sex, you realize that women have been done over all throughout history.
What I get from, well, from your podcast and from starting to look at my own work through the lens of so much that I didn't know in history of my coverage of gender violence, studying women's sexuality in history seems like an ongoing examination of how we've suppressed and oppressed and maligned women and LGBTQ folks and basically just alibied men.
It's true. Men's straight, white, wealthy men's sexuality
Right.
has been centralized throughout most of our history. I'll pick that up and say that doesn't mean that they haven't been subject to horrendous stigma, censure, and control as well. In fact, sex is a way that's used to control all of us, but some people definitely did better out of certain deals than other ones. And women's sexuality has long been framed as playing an ancillary to men's. Either we are provoking them to desire, or we don't have any desire of our own, or it's all about putting penises into things. Even our current understanding of what sex is, if you ask your average person on the street, what's sex? What is that? Their go-to answer will be it's putting a penis into a vagina. And that's not anyone's fault. That's the cultural conditioning that we all live with. But we are so centered around penetration, penile penetration, and our understanding of what sex is. We are still unpicking that, and that has been a millennia in the making.
I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it's because of what I report on, what I listen to, what I'm immersed in right now and doing this project,
Mm.
that sex became the vehicle, right? The primary vehicle
Mm.
for individual and societal control, right? Individual control through social control. Why sex? Why not something else?
With sex, the stakes can be pretty high. I mean, there are other mechanisms of social control that human beings have explored and deployed over the centuries. Criminality would be a good one of behavior that we deem illegal or not illegal. What is that? How do we punish that? Sex is a big one because it can result in babies. And the P and V sex most definitely can result in babies. So therefore, the stakes are higher because this is generating the future. We are into inheritance rights. We are into lineage. So there is a control there that it's not simply about controlling pleasure, it's about controlling ownership of future generations, ownership of resources. And if you're dealing with something like patriarchal inheritance rights, so which is the patriarchal system in most cultures around the world, not all, where it's the male line who inherits, it's the male name that's passed down. Now sex has become an incredibly fraught issue because in order to ensure legitimate siring and issue, the sex of the woman has to be controlled at all costs. So there's one reason why sex is controlled. But you'll find as well if you look throughout history, and we still do it. Pleasure is very tightly controlled. We have a lot of shame around pleasure. We still have a lot of shame around it. Food is another one. Food historians and sex historians, I think that we get on pretty well together because we cover a lot of the same ground. Is why do we still shame food? Why do we shame pleasure? Why do we shame? It's nicer to sit down than it is to go and run a marathon. It's nicer to eat a trifle than it is to have a bag of kale or carrot sticks. But we shame it. It's caught up with notions of how hard you work, how disciplined you are. Sex is part of that. It's part of this you should be able to control. And I think that it's linked to this fear of just to be lazy, we'll call it the baser urges. But even that, calling it the baser urges, shows a shaming is going on, doesn't it? Is that there's a beast within us. We have to be able to control it at all costs because
Right.
sometimes you do feel out of control when it comes to sex. Not like wildly out of control. That's a person who should be in jail. But we've all done
Right.
stupid things when the red mist descends, when you're in the grip of horniness and like, oh God, why did it, like, people blowing up careers, jobs, marriages, families, for what? For what?
Mm-hmm.
For a little giddy thrill. But we can't quite seem to get a grip on it. And I think that terrifies us. So combine that with the fact that, well, you do have to have sex because we have to have babies. Someone's got to have the babies. And you get a really complex and fraught issue around pleasure, control, the law, patriarchy. We're very, very anxious about sex. We haven't worked this one out at all.
Does it all get more knotted up when you throw religion into it? Because I can't imagine our earliest ancestors, right? The early hominids feeling such
Mm,
shame about eating or getting down with one another when we were still closer to, well, we're always animals, but when we were less human, let's say, less sapiens. Although I don't know how much sapiens we are now. I mean, that's
yeah,
that's
yeah.
debatable about a lot of us.
Yeah, good point. It's kind of, I know that it can be very comforting to imagine that when, if before we became civilized, that we were all cavorting in the nip in a happy paradise somewhere, and then religion came in to mess it up. It's not quite right. Some of the earliest textual written evidence that we've got of sexual behavior comes to us from somewhere like Mesopotamia, because we have the cuneiform writing. They have a very different attitude to sex. It seems to be quite open and out and frank, and they are talking about it a lot. They have goddesses, very powerful goddesses of sex and war, Ishtar, or Inanna. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't shame attached to it. And it doesn't mean that there weren't social mechanisms of control and ideas of modesty. It's just different to the ones that we have now. When you talk about shame, the Abrahamic faiths, when they come in, yeah, they brought a lot of that. They brought a lot. And the Abrahamic faith, so Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, they are radically different from the faiths that have gone before because they have one God, and their God doesn't have sex. And if you'd said to an ancient Greek or an ancient Roman person that like this is a completely chaste, and there's one of them in a completely chaste God, it would have seemed really strange to them. And indeed, it was really strange to them, because before that you had a pantheon of gods, be that Greek or Roman or Norse or Mesopotamian. So you could kind of, it's almost like a choose your own religion. You could find the god that you really liked and stick with them. And there were some very, very horny gods. And then in come the Abrahamic faiths, where suddenly that is shame and it's shameful. So it did change things. It tried to repress sexuality and pleasure in a way that hadn't been done before. But it's not right to say that they didn't have their own hang-ups about sex before that came in at all. We've always been weird about it. Always.
When you say Mesopotamia, just to remind people what time frame that is and what were some of the hangups then, if they were writing so openly about it.
So some of the earliest references that we've got, it's about 3000 BC, and we've got references to a very early goddess of war and sex who is Inanna, later Ishtar. And some of her hymns and some of the devotion and the stories that we get around her are highly erotic. She likes to have a lot of sex, and there are some, they're called wedding hymns to her and her husband Dumuzi, where she's talking about, I want you to water my lettuce and plough my furrow, and it's really erotically charged. But then also we've got various codes in law that were set down. So it's things like if a woman is seen without her veil, that she can have tar poured over her head. So
Mm.
it's a really mixed pot of things. So there was definitely shame involved there as well, and control and punishment.
What are your favorite periods to study? What are some of your favorite periods to study and why?
My PhD was in the 19th century. It was in the Victorians, and basically how the Victorians messed up history for everybody else. I have a real weakness for the Victorians. I just think they're completely bonkers. You've got a group of people across Europe, predominantly, I'm talking about, who are in the grip of the Industrial Revolution, which was earth-shattering in a way that you couldn't even conceive of. Like, I know that the internet has done insane things for us, but it's not without precedent. We had phones. We could conceive of the fact that you can talk to people on the other side of the world. But from one lifetime to go to like discover telephone and moving pictures, and medicine suddenly gets improved dramatically, and antibiotics come in, and like this, it was so rapid, the change. And they're trying to cope with it and they're trying to deal with it and they're not doing a very good job. And the thing that I really love about the Victorians, and I wouldn't have wanted to be a Victorian at all, is how they try and repress sex but are terrible at it because they're just as horny as everybody else. You get this really forward facing middle class identity of like, well, really, you shouldn't be. Oh, I'd say not. We don't do that, vicar, and all this stuff, and really like upset about sex and sexuality. But at the same time, they cannot stop talking about it. It is absolutely everywhere. So I do like that. I like that tension in the 19th century.
Was it the Victorians that came up with bicycle face?
So it was the Victor. So that's a perfect example of why I love them. They're absolutely mad. So the bicycle had been around for a long time, but it wasn't really a bicycle that you would want to ride. I think it was like in the 16th century, the first one was invented, and it was just like a frame with wheels, no spokes or gears or pneumatic tires, and it was very dangerous. But by the time you get to the late 19th century, so we're talking about like the 1890s, really, you finally got bicycles with pneumatic tires, suspension, brakes. Women can ride them for the first time. And there's this golden age of bike riding. And to let people understand really what that did, like, do you remember when you first learned how to drive your car? I'm assuming you can drive.
Yeah, yeah.
You remember like sitting in the car and thinking, oh my God, I could go anywhere. I could
Yeah.
literally go anywhere.
The world is mine. Yeah.
Oh my God, right? So now I know you can't go as far on a bike as you can in a car, but it was that same like, oh my God, I can go places. I can travel a lot of
Mm,
ground because people were really restricted to how far they could travel until very, very recently in our history. Yes, you could get a stagecoach if you had money, or when buses are invented, but they're not super accessible. So
right.
a bicycle you can go anywhere you want. Oh my God. So, of course, the Victorians panicked about that and started to produce all this pseudo medical, pseudo scientific literature about the dangers of the bicycle for women in particular. I think one crazy person talked about a perilous lack of corsetry and bicycle face was this. I think it was a joke. I haven't found anyone that's taken it very. I can't find like the origin of this, but bicycle face was this theory that women would develop an ugly pinched face if they cycled too much. Of course they would. It was mostly in America. It was in Australia as well. A lot of physicians panicking about women
Mm-hmm.
riding bicycles, mainly because of the saddle has to be between the legs. It causes a lot of vibrations, and there's fear that women are going to just ride their bicycles over cobbles all day long, and then the world will go completely mad. It's all complete nonsense, of course it is. But that is a very Victorian bind that they've got themselves in. And I just love that stuff. They're absolutely bonkers.
How do you study ancient sexuality amid a relative dearth of documentation and information? I mean, you're saying in Mesopotamia, they're writing about it very openly and they're writing a lot about it. But I imagine that if you're looking over the past 5,000 years, it's only really in the last few centuries where you have a ton of information. So how do you study it? How do you find the documentation? And then how do you understand it compared to current morals, right? Because we're constantly translating and interpreting things that we see about the past through our very modern lens.
Another reason I love studying the Victorians is they're easier to study because there's a lot of information with which to attempt to understand them. But no, the further you go back in the past, the more scarce the information gets, the more difficult it is to try and understand that. But any historians that are looking at, so your ancient scholars, they're very well aware that what they are working with is fragments. And the fragments that they've got do not tell the whole picture. It's a piece of evidence and they can talk about it and they can speculate about it, but it is very difficult to get an entire picture from what's left often. Like, I was talking about Inanna and Ishtar. Yeah,
Hmm.
there are really erotic songs dedicated to this goddess, but does that mean that your average Mesopotamian woman was allowed to behave like that? What can we extrapolate from that? It's difficult to make that case, but it doesn't mean that that information is not important and that it's not worth something. And then you try and piece it together. It's like it's a full profile from the textual analysis through to archaeological evidence, the things that people can do now with DNA and
Mm.
scientific
Hmm.
testing of remains is absolutely incredible. So you try and build a picture, but ultimately all history is telling stories. That's what historians do, is we look at the evidence and we come up with the most likely story of what we think happened. And that's why it can get very ferocious, the debates, because people like my story is different from your story. But it is all stories because we weren't there. It's always an educated guess, a very, very, very educated guess. But that's why that's why all historians understand that what they know can be liable to change within a second. That's the fear all historians have. Like, I've written loads about the Victorians and the vibrators and how I think that story is a complete load of bollocks. I'm completely convinced that it is an absolute nonsense. But for all I know, somewhere in a chest hidden away is a 19th century vibrator with a small note on it saying I was definitely invented to cure hysteria. And then I'll have to be like, no, oh no. Like, that happens to historians all the time. So you've just got to do the best with the sources
Right.
that you have and be as thorough as you can be.
That was in one of the recent episodes of Betwixt the Sheets, right? You were talking about the myth of doctors basically fingering women to get them off, to get them to orgasm.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
have, that myth always bothered me.
Good.
If that were true, then most of that would be rape because most people don't want to talk back to their doctor even when they tell them to take Tylenol.
See, there we go. There we go.
So if you have this man, and they were almost always men, telling a woman, oh, there's something wrong with you, and what I need to do is to stick my fingers in your vagina.
Your hunch is absolutely 100% correct. And before I started researching this, my hunch around it was that the Victorians don't like masturbation. Actually, they all loved it because everyone loves masturbation, but they felt really bad about it. And doctors were telling them that masturbation was wrong and bad for you. And we still have a bit of that today. Like, if anyone grew up believing that if they masturbated, they'd become deformed or their labia would become saggy or they'd go blind or any of these things, that's Victorian. That's a Victorian idea that too much masturbation would really damage your health. So there's no way those doctors are going to prescribe masturbating. And that whole story comes from one book by Rachel Maines called The Technology of Orgasm, published in, I think it was 1990 or 1994, something like that. And she puts forward a hypothesis that since the ancient world, doctors have been masturbating their women patients to orgasm or to hysterical paroxysm to cure them of hysteria. But the thing is she's just wrong. Like, she misreads a lot of ancient sources because she's not a scholar of Latin or Greek. So that and the classical scholars have pushed back and said you've mistranslated that, you've misread that. That's not right. And there's a lot of jumping to conclusions throughout it. The vibrator that the Victorians were supposed to have invented was by a guy called Granville. And if you actually look at it, it's not a vibrator. It's a giant battery. Well, it is a vibrator. He called it a vibrator, but it's not what we're thinking of. It's a giant battery with an electrical current going through it that was vibrating like zzz, 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 zzz. And what looks like a sort of a battery on a piece of string that he would bang against the body. He called it percussing. It's not what we think of when we think of a vibrator at all. And the thing is like Rachel Main's got it wrong. It happens. That's, like I said, that's what historians do, is we put forward a theory and then we hold it up and then other academics go, yeah, no, or, they shout a lot. So fair play, she put forward an idea. But the problem was it was such a fantastic idea. It was so titillating and it went right to the heart of what we think about the Victorians, these sexually repressed hypocrites, that it took on a life of its own and films were made about it and people still talk about it and it's still doing the rounds to this very day. And it is not true. It's not true. The Victorians thought that masturbation was highly injurious to your health. They were not going to prescribe a round of finger banging to women.
I actually have a little pink vibrator that I got as swag at the Rome Film Festival. In my previous life, I was a film industry reporter. I lived in Italy. I lived in Rome.
Wow.
And at the press premiere of Hysteria, they gave away little vibrators with all these different little tops to them.
It's a fun story, but it's not right. It's just not right. And also, like, we need to be careful with it because it is very insulting to women of the past. Because in order for that story to be correct, it would have to be that women in the 19th century were idiots, basically,
Yeah.
that they were being taken along to the doctors, just kind of, oh yeah, that sounds about right, with no agency whatsoever, and were either being fooled into having a vibrator used on them, or they were sexually deviant and went to the doctors requesting this specifically. And both of those are pretty ugly and not true. So if you hear people bringing that one out and it still does the rounds regularly, you can just slap them down. It's not true.
Yeah, I found it to be extremely infantilizing, as if a woman had never touched herself and figured out this is pleasurable.
Yes.
Like, this could release some stress.
Exactly.
She didn't even know she had a vulva. She didn't know she had a vulva. She didn't know she had a clitoris.
Yeah.
And it took a man to tell her.
Yeah, thanks, man. And as you said, the relationship that patients have with their doctors is often very anxious and very difficult, and they're not liable to just go, oh, have at it then. If you think that this is a good idea, you crack on.
Historians, you bring your modern constructs, your social constructs and anthropological constructs. The flip side of that is how much of a pass do you give people in history who had ideas that were, bonkers at best and just abusive and what we would consider criminal now at worst, especially when we're talking female sexuality, because so much of it comes down to it's really impossible. It's impossible to study, to talk about modern day sexuality without talking about sexual violence. Almost every person I've had, whether they're an
Yeah,
expert,
yeah.
friend, or a former student, or somebody talking about how all of these cultural norms affect them. And sexual violence has come up almost every single time. And in the past, when consent was not much of a concept at all.
They understood consent. It's just their understanding of consent was very different from what ours is. It's always been illegal to sexually assault and to rape people, but who that applied to has been very broadly interpreted. It's, for example, if you go to the Anglo-Saxon period, we have evidence of court records where they have different gradations of punishment for depending on who was the victim. If a young virgin was sexually assaulted, that was the maximum penalty, whereas if it was a widow, the penalty was substantially reduced to just a fine. Because so it's but that tells us a lot, doesn't it?
More than a child, if it were a child?
No, it doesn't say a child, it just says a virgin, actually. So I guess that would be part of that. But I mean, you can't study the history of sex without encountering violence because it's absolutely everywhere. It's endemic. Of course, what you then have to do is try and meet it where it is, what the cultural norms were at the time, because how did they understand this? Because today, looking back, we have such a broader and more sensitive understanding of what abuse is. For example, I was recently doing a bit of research on Lord Byron, everyone's favourite Regency scallywag, and he lost his virginity, quote unquote, to his nurse when he was about 9. And he later on said she was a much woman in her 20s, 30s. She's called May Gray. She was an alcoholic. She was a Calvinist. So in the daytime, she'd be berating him because he was full of sin. And in the evening, she would come in drunk. And he said, played tricks upon my person.
Hmm.
And when you look at that from our modern perspective, we understand completely that that's abuse. We understand that that's sexual abuse, that that child was groomed, that that should not have happened. How did he understand that? That's the question that the historian has to
Mm-hmm.
get at. You can acknowledge that is absolutely abuse, but how did he understand that? Did he understand that that was abuse at the time? And that is a much harder question to answer because we're not there and we don't have their understanding. And it's the same with so many things that we would have now quite rightly understand as cruel, manipulative, sexual, violent abuse just passed by as like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's just normal. Throughout most of history, the understanding of rape has been, at least in the 19th century, the 18th century, there had to be what was called a hue and cry in order to prove a case of rape. So you would have to have witnesses to the fact that you'd shouted out and screamed.
Mm.
There would have to be injuries on your body to prove that you were subject to violence and you had been forced. And if those things weren't there, then they didn't regard it as assault and proof of assault, which is grotesque to our modern ears and rightly so. But that was what they understood. It's brutal.
It's grotesque, but it still happens. I mean, in Italy in the 90s, there was a case where I think was it the judge said this woman couldn't have been raped because she had jeans on, and to get jeans off.
There you go. Yeah.
And we're still
Unpicking this stuff. It's still with us. It's still the idea that the victim is somehow responsible, that perhaps he didn't mean to do it. It was just a terrible accident and a misunderstanding. All of that is still with us. And you can trace the shadows of that stuff back a really, really long time. Actually,
yeah.
it's been a very long time in the making.
As a university professor, I've taught radio broadcast as a public radio reporter, but because of my wheelhouse, students will talk to me,
Yeah, same.
will share stories of sexual violence. But I will also take time in every class, even if we're doing, I'm going to teach you how to do a 5-minute newscast, but we're also going to talk about sexual violence and to try and explain to them about coercion, that most of it is coercion.
Yeah.
You're not, A, they're not going to be witnesses unless it's, I mean, unless it's
Mm.
gang rape. But I will tell them, we're all capable of it. And I want to be the little voice in your head the next time you're pressuring someone, because that's what it's going to be. It's going to be,
Yeah.
hey, you said you would, or you want to, or you owe me. And it's like, the next time you do that, I want you to just imagine the person is 10 years old. And they're like, oh my
Wow.
God, that's disgusting, problem. I'm like, it is, because we're all on board that a 10-year-old body should not be violated. But there is no magical age at
Yeah.
which suddenly it can be. And it's fine. They're like, well, but people can say no. And I'm like, oh, come on. If people could say no, bullies wouldn't be so successful.
So true. And but that's something that's really good about our own time and our own culture, is that we are now having these kind of conversations around what consent is, what is
Yeah.
coercive control, what are the power balances implicit. And that those are new conversations. We've always had conversations around what rape is, for example, but the idea of what it was quite far removed from what we understand. It would be a violent assault, normally upon a virgin in a back alley by a stranger. The idea of marital rape, it wasn't made illegal in this country until the 1990s.
Yeah. Nor in this one. It's not statewide.
Yeah.
Some states had it, but not nationwide.
It's such a recent development in our history, and we are still we've still got so far to go. We like to think of ourselves as being really sexually liberated, that we've got it all fixed now, and we look to people in the past and go, oh my God, look at the stupid stuff they were doing. It is within living memory, young living memory of this stuff. So
Yeah.
we're not out of the woods. We're still unpacking this, and we've got a long way to go.
That's another thing I teach journalism students. Like, you would need to be a time traveler. You
Yeah.
need to imagine 100 or 500 years from now what things people are going to look back on that we're doing and
Mm.
think that is batshit crazy,
Yeah, that's insane that they were doing that.
or that's
Yeah.
wrong, that's criminal, that's immoral, that's. But were there voices in the past several hundred years? Could you find writings and voices of people who were saying, yes, this is like, who were saying this is abuse or this is wrong, that would match our modern perceptions? I think about one of the most powerful aspects of the National African American History Museum in Washington, D.C. You have the downstairs. I don't know if you've been to it.
Mm-mm.
The downstairs is, it's claustrophobic, it's dark, it's meant to replicate a ship of enslaved
Okay.
people. And you do have, and I wish they had more of them, you do have every once in a while, you'll have a plaque, you'll have somebody saying in the 15th century, in the 16th century, this is horrifying, this is wrong, we shouldn't be doing this to people. Oh, but the money. Like, that they knew.
They did know. They did know. It's not true that people are walking around completely with nobody voicing any objections to this at all. And you do find voices, many voices throughout history of people going, hang on a minute. I don't think that that's quite right. But they're shouted down, they're ignored, they're not listened to. Or it takes a very long time for those voices to become mainstream. Like, as long as you've had slavery and enslavement, there were people challenging this. There were people going, I don't think that this is a particularly good idea. I don't think this is. And all throughout history, you can find quite defiant voices around sexuality and women and pleasure. What happened to them and happened to those voices, that's a different conversation. But they're there. They
Mm.
aren't completely modern. They might sound a little bit old fashioned to us, but when you look at it within the context of the time, there are people there that are trying very hard to fight the fight and to there's a medieval poet who's very famous called Gwerfel Meccan. Was she 15th century? I think it's a late medieval, who writes really, really erotic poems about penises, and her most famous one is called Ode to the Cunt, or Ode to the Vulva, where she challenges poets. She calls them all hypocrites because they spend so much time talking about how much they love a woman's eyes and her hair and her skin, when we all know what you're actually after is pussy, and you aren't brave enough to actually say it. And we know so little about Gwerfel Meccan, apart from that her verse survived. But the fact that it's there at all is impressive. And she writes this really bawdy verse about celebrating lovely quim, she calls it, and a bright red curtain and its faultless plumage. And it's just such a vivid description. You know, she was there and she was challenging, but it's where the dominant narrative is and where that's pushing back. So you can find exceptions. You can always find exceptions. You can find people in the 19th century going, I think women can orgasm, actually. I'm pretty sure that they can. And you can find people going, it's not true that they don't experience desire. But the dominant narrative is something else. Much in the same way that today we don't have one narrative surrounding us. We have legion. We have people who think all kinds of things, but it's where the status quo comes into play. But they're there, they're always there. So, the idea that people hadn't worked out that it's wrong to rape and that it's wrong to enslave people and that it's wrong that women have zero rights as soon as they get married. No, it's not true. They were there. Those voices were there. They weren't listened to, but they were there.
Mm. On a lighter note, when you're talking about cunts and vulvas, and what are some of your favorite? I know in A Curious History of Sex, you have such a broad range of names and terms for sex, for
I had
genitalia.
so much fun with that.
What are some of your favorite? And I wrote down ones I had never heard: vagina as the sword holder and cock alley, and boy in the boat for
Oh,
clitoris,
dear.
which
Yeah.
both made me laugh and made me angry. It's like, because it's still male. It's still male. It's still
It
a fucking
is.
boy.
It is. It is. That these aren't my euphemisms. These are actual ones that exist. And all throughout the book, I use as much slang as I can, and I put the date where it was first recorded next to it. Boy in the boat for a clitoris, which I quite like, or little bald man in a boat is another one. We should do. It's got girl in the boat or something, or
Yeah.
bold girl in the boat. That sounds a bit weird though.
Yeah.
That one. So some of my favorites. Sneezing into cabbage is my favorite slang for cunnilingus. I just so ridiculous. It's so stupid. Another one from like the 1940s for cunnilingus is impersonating Stalin, which people take a while to get. And then you see the penny drop. You're like, because they had pubic hair,
Because of the mustache. Because
the mustache. So I like that one very much. Some favorite ones. Yeah, sneezing in the cabbage. That's definitely what. Any green is a slang that goes well back. The association of the color green with promiscuity. So to get a green gown meant that you'd had sex, probably because we're talking about grass stains outside. You see, and one of the oldest vulva metaphors that we have is lettuce and cabbage. That's even Anana in her ancient Mesopotamian hymns is singing about water my lettuce. Water my lettuce.
the leaves, it's not a far jump from, a George O'Keeffe painting to a vegetable,
Exactly.
from a flower to a vegetable. Yeah.
Sort of leaves, petals.
Cabbage are actually quite beautiful when they flower.
They are. So we've kind of got like that sort of opening idea. There are certain cabbages that are aphrodisiacs. There is one in Egypt that is still sold today as an aphrodisiac. So they crop up all the time. So the poor old, the humble cabbage has had, what's the opposite of a glow up? A glow down. Like people don't think of it as sexy anymore. But even like your dirty blues singers in 1920s America used to sing about, he's coming over to steam my cabbage and that kind of stuff.
It's due for a revival, and I'll rethink my. I'm originally from Yugoslavia, where a lot of cabbage is eaten. So we pay homage, not knowing.
Most people don't know about that one,
Mm.
about cabbage and the color green. And what was interesting about studying the slang of it is that there's so many words in circulation for the penis. Like there must be millions of slang words. There's many words for the vulva, many. For the clitoris, a handful. Tiny, like a fraction, just hardly any at all.
We've only known the correct shape of it for a couple of decades, like like proven, like demonstrated.
Actual 3D model of it. We
Yeah.
have absolutely. They have understood that the clitoris is much bigger than the little bald head, the bald man in the boat.
Yeah, the baldy on top.
The baldy in the boat. They've understood that. You can find anatomical drawings going back to the 16th, 17th century, which shows they're called clitoral roots, the legs of the clitoris. But an actual anatomical 3D drawing, was that 2009 when that was first done? It was very recent.
Yeah, I know that 2005 was when the MRI.
Maybe it was 2005 then. Yeah.
Helen O'Connell was able to prove it. I mean, she wasn't the first person to posit. To posit that theory, but she was the first person to prove it because technology finally got good enough. And I have a 3D model that I show to people, and I show to people who've gone to med school. But if they're
Yeah,
younger than 35 or so, they have no idea what it is.
they haven't seen it. No.
And I joke about that the clitoris is not yet of legal drinking age in the US because since the
So true.
actual proof, right?
Yeah,
It's only been
yeah.
20 years, so it's got next year it can go to a bar.
One of my favorite sex facts throughout history is that it was two Renaissance anatomists who discovered the clitoris in the mid 16th century. I love that. It's the most champion act of mansplaining in the whole of human history. They both went on the record to be like, "Oh my God, we've discovered this thing! It's amazing!" And one was called Ronaldo Colombo, not the detective, a different guy, and the other one was Falloppio of fallopian tube fame, and they both
Oh, right.
claimed to have made this huge, important discovery. To be completely fair to them, what they were claiming they discovered was that it was an entire organ in and of itself, rather than just a nice place to rub to feel good. But yeah, I love that
Mhm.
they go on record as being the ones to have discovered the clitoris.
Did they call it a small penis? Somebody recently came up in conversation where somebody said, is the clitoris a small penis? And I thought, how come nobody's ever asked if the penis is a big clitoris?
Another one of my favorite sex facts is that when you actually measure the entire structure of the clitoris, its averages, I think it's about 4 inches, or maybe 4 centimeters, might be muddling it up, when flaccid, which is actually comparable to a penis, and it engorges itself and it enlarges itself. So they are really not that different in shape
Yeah.
or size at all.
Well, people are just thinking of the baldy, so
Hi,
they
the
think that
baldy, the
that's like
bald
so.
head.
Yeah, there's this
Yeah.
the women have this little weenie penis, which is also a holdover from millennia of
Yeah.
scientists and doctors and heavy medical professionals in heavy air quotes thinking that we were failed men.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. That has dogged women's medical research and understanding, and not even, I suppose it was medicine. That goes way back to the ancient Greeks, when they thought that women were inferior versions of men, and that women were
Yeah.
basically the inversion of it. So, and I guess you can kind of see, you can at least see the logic. It's crap and it's not right, but you can see what they're thinking of, that they view it as very much binary, that men have got a sticky out penis and women have got a going in bit, and that men don't have boobs and women do have boobs, and like men are strong and women are weak, and all you can see like what they're kind of thinking, this idea of opposites. And unfortunately that comes to the conclusion that women are inferior men. Basically, that was their understanding. That's a very Greek understanding.
I can understand the opposites. I can understand seeing it in this binary way, but then that again, that's playground politics, that those who have the power say, well, the better ones.
Yeah.
There's two. There's the
Mm.
outie and the innie, and the outie's outie goes into the innie's innie. But it's, they could have also said, you need both.
They could have done that, but they didn't.
And they're both they're equal.
They didn't say that it wasn't needed. It is very important. But if you look at it, the Greeks in particular, they thought that semen was this like magical, special elixir where the soul was formed, and they viewed women very much as like almost like the soil that you put a seed into. Like they were just the plant pot that the thing grew in, where all of the masculine energy and the semen and all the soul, that was all thanks to the father. So that was them. So thanks very much for that, guys. But yeah, you're right. All throughout history, and even still to this day, women are often viewed as versions of men, and often are written out of medical expertise. Something like the seatbelt, for example, that wasn't even tested on women. They just assumed that they tested it on men. And the same with medicine, is it was
Hmm.
very recent that laws were passed that said that women had to be included in trials.
Yeah, I believe
So it's
in this millennium. I don't think it was
yeah,
in the 20th century that the
no,
laws were passed. It was in
yep,
the early 2000s,
yep.
2010s even.
I think it was like understanding that women are creatures of their on their own, and that the vulva is an organ in and of itself, and not an absence of a penis, or not an inverted penis, Freud, or not like that we don't have penis envy. This idea that it's an organ all of its own. It's not an absence of a dick. That is something that we're still unpicking to this day.
You just made me think. I've heard more men say that they wish that they had boobs, but I've never heard a woman say she wants a penis. I've never even
Oh,
jokingly say, I wish I had a penis. Except for
I
like a
want
little
a
blip in time when
penis.
I was a kid because I loved the idea of peeing standing up. But I was like 5. I was in 1st grade, But that wasn't penis envy. That was just like stand-up peeing envy.
I'd love to have a penis for a bit. I'd want to give it back, but I want to know if it's as cracked up to be as they seem to think that it is. Like I'd love to be in that body and have a penis and testicles.
Oh, yeah, try it out.
Try it out, yeah,
Try it
but I
out.
wouldn't swap it, I don't think. I'm
Yeah.
fine for that.
Wanting to, yeah.
Unfortunately, that's what I mean when I said that the history of women has been centered completely around the penis, around the primacy of the
Yeah.
penis, and whether that's the ancient Greeks coming up with the stuff, or that was Freud thinking that women have penis envy, or all the kind of slang that you get where it's the vulva is described as an absence of a
Mhm.
penis, a flat, that it just doesn't exist. We are still unpicking that stuff to this day.
Speaking of vulvas, and you mentioned pubic hair before. Is this the only time in our history that we are shaving our pubic hair?
No, we've been doing that for a very, very long time. There's evidence of that going back to the ancient Egyptians. In Muslim countries, it was considered clean, men and women both, and still get rid of their pubic hair often. There's evidence of waxing. In Renaissance Italy, it was considered quite a big thing was to get rid of pubic hair on women. You get a lot of English writers going over there and they refer to it as the Italian way, that they've been to an Italian brothel and they're really quite shocked by it. They don't understand it at all. And you get certain recipes that crop up in I think it's Florence or Venice, and it's this awful recipe of how to take body hair off, and it's basically like lye and just it's like
Oh,
highly burning sensations, and it's just awful. But yeah, this is not the first time that we have been doing that. The Italians were big on it in various Muslim countries. In ancient Rome, for example, there's some evidence that if you went to the bathhouses, you could have your body hair plucked by a willing assistant. So it's absolutely not the first time that we've done that. And of course, if you look at statues, they tend to be pubeless if they are a woman, your ancient statues, and in art as well. We might get a tiny gesture of pubic hair, but that's more about modesty than anything else.
oh my god, I've never thought of that. Of all the statues I've seen in all my time in Rome, in Italy, in Europe,
Yeah.
I've never seen a bushy female statue.
No, no. You get what you get is sort of like just a bit of a gesture towards sort of an area. It's not really proving that they shaved. It's more just about like not presenting detail because that would be considered too raunchy. But yeah, pubes in art, that was a 19th century thing as well.
What are some of the I know that I mean beauty standards change all the time. We think that I am always fighting people who say, "Well, no, men like this. Men like women who look this way. Women like men who look this way." It's like it was only, historically speaking, a blip ago that the most powerful humans on earth, the kings, wore wigs and powdered their faces and wore heels and
Yeah,
tights and, or
yeah.
stockings. And they're constantly changing. And none of these beauty standards that we go by are biological imperatives. I mean, that I know of.
There's a few constants that you get
What are the constants?
healthy.
Okay, fair enough. And not stinky, right? Not
Yeah,
smelling.
not smelling. I haven't found anybody yet that's been like, yeah, it's great to smell of BO. Most cultures, I'm sure there'll be some outlier to that will present itself. Being healthy, generally having a clear complexion, generally. Yeah, but even then, you've got like some weird things that complicate it. Like the Victorians had a real thing about consumptive chic, and of course, weirder thing about heroin chic.
Kate Moss in the 90s
Yeah,
brought back consumptive chic.
didn't look particularly healthy, but generally clear skin, clear eyes, not smelling bad, not diseased, I think is probably the constant.
Clear eyes meaning light, like blue
Not
or
necessarily blue, they can be dark, but just like large, bright eyes. They get written about quite a lot. Red lips tend to be referenced a lot throughout history. But even that's quite changeable. But apart from that, apart from not looking like you are physically diseased and unwell, yeah, it's pretty much up for grabs. Our understanding of what's masculine, what's feminine, what's sexy, what's not sexy, those change a lot. And a lot of it's to do with money, you notice. Beauty is about what is elusive, isn't it? It's about what is rare and special. So you see it changing throughout most of our history. It was considered beautiful in the West, at least, and certainly in some Eastern countries as well. To have a bit of meat on your bones to have a bit of junk in the trunk, to be a bit chubby. You can see it in the art. You can see that there are women with double chins, and you can see the statues. They've got a bit of a paunch.
Yeah.
That was considered very, very desirable. Little boobs, little kind of perky apples, they're often
Mm-hmm.
described as. They were considered the go-to beauty standard. And that isn't what we have today. So it changes all the time. It changes radically, and it'll change again. It's changing right now. It's interesting to see what the introduction of Ozempic and the semaglutide drugs will do to
Mm.
our pursuit of thinness. Now, thinness can become widely available once more. Where's our standard going to go now? How's that going to shift again?
Man, that's a good point. What were some of the kind of craziest things that people did? I mean, one of the ones that, and I don't know why this grosses me out so much. I mean, using lye on pubic hair, even more so.
Pretty bad.
But the shaving of the foreheads.
A tall forehead that was considered very beautiful. Like you can see that in sort of 16th century, 17th century art, medieval art. They use it a lot. Queen Elizabeth apparently shaved her forehead so she could look like her forehead was even taller. That was considered extremely beautiful. I don't know why. I can't tell you. At least when chunky women are in fashion, you can make an argument that perhaps it's about fertility. It probably isn't. It's probably about money and about being able to afford food. Quite why a high hairline was considered desirable, I don't know. But then people will look back at pictures of us today and look and think, what on earth? What on earth are they doing
Hmm.
with these huge, weird eyebrows and everyone looking like Kim Kardashian? They'll be equally as bamboozled.
Or no eyebrows, or like penciled in, yeah, like the or tattooed eyebrows, or yeah.
They'll look just as weird to people 500 years from now as portraits from the 18th century look like us today. Because it changes, it will change again.
Has that seeped into your own life in the sense of there are certain things that you look at, you're like, yeah, this is just a fad. I'm not falling for this.
I don't think you can help falling for fads. Like we're all, even if you think you're exempting yourself from fads, you're probably falling for one somewhere or other because we're all conditioned by our own beauty standards as to. I mean, if you actually made yourself up to look like an 18th century beauty today and went out and about around town, you would look very odd. You look quite strange. So we're all subject to modern conditioning. But yeah, you sort of can trace the cycles coming back through eyebrow fashions and the fashion of the how pale you are or what your hair's doing or
Mhm.
wigs is another one, and you can see that. So I guess that does it influence me? It's more like, well, you may as well just do what you want. You may as well just enjoy it. Just don't fight it, and don't. I don't think you have to justify it. I think that you can just enjoy what you want.
The Italian word for makeup, trucco, literally means trick.
Oh, I like that. I didn't know that.
Let me ask you about Betwixt the Sheets. And I would love to have you back on some other time if you can to talk about prostitution and sex work and
Sounds good to me.
brothels for clergymen. Yeah. Your podcast, which now has, like I said, I consume so much of it, and you're at 300 and something episodes. Was that your idea? Did somebody come to you as a well-known sex historian, or was it something in between?
It was a collaborative effort. So I was speaking to History Hit, who are the company that make it, and we got together and said, "Have you ever thought about doing a podcast?" It's like I no. I don't know anything about podcasting. So we had a meeting and we were talking about like, well, what would you want to do? It's like I'd want it to be on sex history. I'd want it to be women led. I want it to have a feminist focus. I'd want it to be on social history. I'd want it that I'm talking to people because you can't be an expert in everything, and I want to talk to the experts. So between us, we developed it, and we thought, well, we'll have a go at it then, and we did, and I'm very, very glad that we did.
What have been some of your, I don't know if it's fair to ask, some of your favorite episodes or some of the favorite things that you've learned that just blew your mind?
Oh, there's so many things that blow my mind. I'm regularly learning things today. But like there was an episode out today about Mary Shelley, which I really loved, and we're talking about, did Mary Shelley lose her virginity to Percy Bysshe Shelley on her mother's grave? And the person I was talking to, a biographer of Mary Shelley, went possibly, but her mother's grave is vertical, and I hadn't realised that. It's just a small fact, just a small thing that makes you go, oh, maybe it wasn't then. But there's been some absolutely amazing guests, and they all tell me new things. There's one guest who'd researched sex work in Dublin, and I didn't know anything that she was telling me before. I thought she was absolutely incredible.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was Wrong Women by Caroline West. And I hadn't known any of that history. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. Mind you, those are some of my favorite ones when I come to it and I don't know anything about it at all. I just sit there and just like, tell me the stuff, tell me your knowledge, tell me things. I love that. Like we were interviewing an Egyptologist quite recently, and they said that there's very limited evidence for the sale of sex in ancient Egypt. The Stephanie Boudin is a scholar of Mesopotamia, and she argues that there was no such thing as the sale of sex in ancient Mesopotamia. I don't know if I'm completely convinced by that, but I love the fact that there are people out there arguing it, and they are the experts on that one. So that's teaching me things I don't know. But all the time I'm learning things all the time.
What was it that the inspiration to start studying sex work and the history of sex work?
I think you can tell a lot about a culture and a time and a place by the way that they treat people that sell sex and their attitudes to it. Because sex work it's got such a tangled relationship to patriarchal structures because on one hand they're providing something that men want and feel entitled to, which is sex, but on the other hand they are benefiting from that, they're exploiting that need, they can amass wealth and power through that not everybody, we should make that quite clear, but that's the threat, that's the fear that sex work can do, that they know the secrets and they know they know they've got the vulnerability, right back to the thing we were saying right at the beginning of where people are vulnerable. So when you look at various cultures, how do they understand sex for pleasure? How do they understand sexual exploitation? How do they understand sex for pay? Because the point of selling sex, and it's overwhelmingly when we think about it, it's women selling sex to men, although that's not the entire history, that's not sex for reproduction. So those women immediately become outliers to the patriarchal norm and the patriarchal idealization of the good wife at home who's just having babies, and she is completely othered. She becomes this disreputable woman, but also she's something that this system wants and craves. So trying to understand how women who sell sex have been understood and treated throughout history, I really think gets to the heart of how women's sexuality has been understood throughout history. So that's why I find it so fascinating. And
There are myths also there to debunk, beginning with that it's not the oldest profession in the world.
not the oldest profession in the world, midwifery is.
Leave it to women. It's still women. It's still women. Is there anything else? Is there something you wanted to add?
Nope, you've been brilliant. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Thanks for joining me, and I hope to have you back. That was the fun, funny, and always informative Kate Lister. You'll find links to her website and socials and a transcript of our conversation at the episodes page of womenlikesex.com, episode 13. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please like, subscribe, and review wherever you're listening and downloading. I swore I'd never say this, but it really does help. Thank you. Women Like Sex is a flipped script production. It is executive produced and edited by me, Natasha Stojanovic. Website design and artwork is by Ted Nunez. Edesio Martinez is associate producer. For more episodes and swag, or to subscribe to the podcast or Patreon, please visit womenlikesex.com, the Women Like Sex YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is Women Like Sex. Pass it on.